Hello and welcome back to another episode of KSP 101. This is episode 10. Sorry to have taken so long to get back to the series. My vacation was over and it was time to get back to work, but now I have enough time to hopefully get all this Duna landing prep work done today. So we're going to pick back up where we left off here in episode 10 and see where we left off. I know we unlocked quite a bit of new tech last time. We have those, and new engines and tanks that we're going to need, as well as the RA-15 relay antenna. That's going to be very useful. It would be nice to have this RA-100, but I think we'll be okay. So we have a good bit of new tech to work with there, so let's go ahead and hop into the VAB and start getting this done. What we're going to need in preparation for this Duna landing. What I'm planning to do is toss up a new relay around Kerbin, then toss a relay around, and then send a station with the refuel so it can fulfill the contract obligation for landing on Duna. Well, actually, it just says land on Duna. It has nothing to do with returning from Duna. The relays for now, and land a probe, prepare the probe. Well, in order to be able to control, so what we will do is we're going to be trying to knock out 2 episodes today too, to try to mitigate that. But so what we're actually going to end up doing is sending the new probe around Kerbin, and then the new probe, not probe but relay, we're going to put the new relay around Kerbin, then we're going to send the relay out to Duna as well as the probe with it. That way the probe can land and we have the relay that we need around Duna at the same time. And then we'll put the station around Duna in orbit and send the first breaking ground science ship to land on Duna. And then after that, I'd be willing to bet that we're going to have to do the same thing at Ike, and when we get to that point, we'll be transferring the space station from Duna orbit into Ike's orbit, and then basically sending the same ship out to that station, then landing on Ike, and then returning from Ike. But for now, let's go ahead and build this new relay. So we have the Probodyne Hex part now. That's going to be the probe core that we're going to be using for this. Let's go ahead and set this out here. We will auto strut it to heaviest part. If I'm not mistaken, let's see, communications, relay, satellite, oops, okay, there we go. And then 2 should be, yes, because we already have the first one here. Now let's take a look at it. It already had a decent amount of relay dishes on it. We're going to be updating this one and decommissioning it. Let's go back to our CRS2. Now we are going to need some structural parts to put those larger relays on. We want the T12 structural tube, and we want to extend it a couple times. And we also want to grab an FLA10 adapter, attach it to the bottom of that, and then attach the tube to that, and auto strut both to grandparent part. And that should be good. Now we just need to attach these new relay dishes. They are quite large, and you'll see why we needed to do that here in just a moment. So once we have that where we want it, we will set it to radial 4, and then auto strut it to grandparent part, and try to bring those in as close as possible until they touch like that. Just bring it back out once, very nice and tight. And then we'll take one more and place it at the top, connected to that probe core, and auto strut it to grandparent part as well. Now we just need to knock out the rest of the stuff required for this relay. We'll go ahead and attach some science to it just in case we need to fulfill any science contract obligations for some quick cash. We'll even actually put some mystery goo on it. And auto strut those to grandparent part. And then move those in just a little bit. There we go. And that should be good. Now we just need to give it some power storage. We'll take these batteries, we'll radio to them about here, and then move them into the structure of the vessel itself. And we will take these 1x6 photovoltaic panels. We'll place those, say, here, and radial 2 should be enough. Make sure to set those to grandparent part. If I'm not mistaken, there should be nothing concerning about the vessel. Okay, very good. So there's our satellite. Now it just needs some propulsion, which we will put on now. It's not going to need a whole lot of fuel for what we're doing, but we're also trying to set this thing up to be sent to Duna as well, which we're going to refit it once we put this one in orbit around Kerbin. So for now, let's grab the, see, it weighs 1.9 tons. So suppose we want to go with this FL 2400 fuel tank, and then make sure that that is set to grandparent part. And then we will stick the Terra engine on the bottom of it and set it to root. Let's go ahead and grab a decoupler and work up the next stage. Get the D12 decoupler, place it there and set it to grandparent part. We're going to break out the fuel adapter to go to the next size up on the fuel tanks. And we're not going to need a whole lot of fuel for this part. We're just going to grab this FLTX 900 and see if that'll work. And it does, because we are now at 10.7 tons, which is exactly where we need to be, because we are trying to break out this Cheetah engine. And that puts it at 11.7 tons, which is great. Should not be much more than that, because it can only push 12.5 tons in a vacuum. Alright, so now that we have those two stages, let's grab it, move it up just a little bit so we can have room to build the launch stages. But before we start building the launch stages, we need to grab the TD18 decoupler for this stage and decouple it up and set it to grandparent part and break out the 1.875 meter fairing and attach it here. Actually, no, let's get rid of that. Let's grab the 2.5 meter, and I'll show you why soon. So we need to make sure that it pops out just enough to be able to make it beyond the reach of these relay dishes. That way the fairing doesn't get stuck. That looks like it should be fine. Okay, and then we will just drag it up into this position here where it's flush with the outer ring of the dish, and then take it up as high as we can in the center and close it. And that looks good. Okay, so there's our payload. Let's go ahead and set it to clamshell deploy, ejection force around 500, and then bring its sides down as close to 2 as we can get it, and auto strut it to grandparent part. Now we will build the launch and orbital stages. Let's grab a reaction wheel, stick it here. We're only using one, so we'll just set it to the heaviest part. And we are just going to make this stage a skipper stage, so it doesn't need to be any larger than 650 kilonewtons of ton pushing ability, so that's 65 tons. We don't want it to be 65. We want it to be closer to, say, no more than about 62, just in case, because it is going to be our mid-launch stage. So let's see. Let's grab our largest Rockomax tank. Very good. Let's set that to grandparent port. Then we'll just grab this X200-16 tank, place it here, set it to grandparent port, make sure the other one is as well, and then we will grab that skipper. We will place it there. Puts us at 62, basically 63 tons. We'll set that to root, and that should be good. Let's go ahead and also make sure our staging is looking good. Alright, let's go ahead and save our progress. Now we just need the initial launch stage. Let's grab the TD25 decoupler, set it to grandparent part, and then we're going to grab 2 of these larger reaction wheels, place them there and there. Auto strut the top one to root and the bottom one to heaviest part. And now it's time to build our mainsail stage. Let's grab again the largest Rockomax tank that we have, set it to grandparent part, and then just like the other stage, grab the other Rockomax tank, set it to grandparent part, and then we will attach the mainsail. Awesome. Now let's just make sure to set that to root, and if I'm not mistaken, we can just grab these basic fins and just a little above here. Oh wow, so that's a lot of aerodynamic effects. So we'll just place these here in the diagonal spots, radial 4. Make sure to highlight those basic fins, set them to grandparent part, and let's break out our launch stabilizers. And as close to the center of mass as possible, so it looks like we're going to be placing it just above the skipper engine. We can place it here, and then drag that mainsail down to go off with those, but before it, and make sure this decoupler is moved up to the skipper. Everything else looks good. Let's go ahead and save that, and I'm going to compare those two. It's less parts. It cost about nearly 3 times as much, a little less, maybe 2.5 times as much, but that's okay. It's still pretty cheap. Now, that should be enough for what we're wanting to do. It'd be a nice test relay that we're going to be putting around orbit of Kerbin before we take it out to Duna. So let's go ahead and launch. Knock out the first part of our Duna preparation, which is placing this relay in orbit around Kerbin. And then we're going to refit this to include a probe, and then chuck it out into Duna's orbit. But we'll get to that here momentarily. So let's lock our SAS, throttle up, and launch. Decent little thrust to weight ratio there. And as always, we're doing a standard profile launch, which is waiting until it hits 100 meters per second, and we're going to try to move it over towards the 90 and 80 marker with the 90-degree inclination. Let's go ahead and try to correct ourselves before that though. Now that we're close to 100, let's start moving over towards the 90 on the 90-degree plane. And then once it hits about 175 meters per second, we're going to be moving over towards 80, and it should hit 250 meters per second by the time you're at the 80 mark. Let's go ahead and lock our SAS onto that 80 mark and let it hit 250. Very close to that prograde being right over top of it as we hit 250. The 90-degree mark on the 90-degree inclination. But we also have to be ready to stage here momentarily, say about 5 more seconds or so. But as we work towards that 90-degree angle mark on the 90-degree inclination, we should be close to 500 meters per second. Go ahead and stage, continue working ourselves over. We have a very low thrust to weight ratio with the skipper engine in an atmosphere, but we are almost in the upper atmosphere. That's why we didn't want to make sure to set it all the way to 65 tons, or else we'd be having some problems. We are very quickly approaching this 90-degree angle. Let's lock on once we get there and then go to our map view. And then highlight our apoapsis. And we'll just ride it out until that hits about 70,000 meters, and then we will go full sideways. Provided we don't run out of fuel in this stage, but we shouldn't because we added quite a bit to it. And we did that in the hopes that this will not only be enough to be a nice solid mid-stage, but to also hopefully do the orbit circularization with this stage. We're getting close. Let's go ahead and move it to our prograde so it increases a little faster. Lock ourselves onto the center of that prograde. We don't want to actually lock prograde itself because then it'll keep dipping more and more sideways on its own. We can just keep it here, and you can see the prograde is still moving over towards that horizon mark on the nav ball on its own. But it is already at 60,000 meters now. Once it hits about 67 to 70,000, we will move it over. Okay, let's slowly start to turn ourselves sideways. Make sure to check out our fuel staging. Lock ourselves onto that horizon mark. And honestly, it should be safe to go ahead and deploy this if we want to. It's in our staging to be the next stage, so just hit X and deploy that. Let that fall into the atmosphere. And our apoapsis is pushing out towards 100,000. Once it reaches 100,000 meters, we will cut the engine off and we'll warp over to the apoapsis and finish our circularization burn. And we will have orbit around Kerbin. We will be done with all the pleasantries. So we're close to 70,000 meters. We're almost in space. Let's go ahead and highlight our photovoltaic panels and extend those. And our relay is already positioned nicely, because once we hit orbit, those panels will be up and down. They will have plenty of sunlight. Now let's go ahead and warp over just a little behind our apoapsis and finish off this orbit. Make sure to lock prograde along the way. And once it's at about 7 seconds away from the apoapsis, we will begin the burn. It should be locked on the prograde by then. Our circularization is already halfway done, so this shouldn't take much. Maybe wait till 5 seconds and start the burn. Very good. It's gonna start pushing that apoapsis ahead of us now, but that's okay. Alright, that's a nice 100 by 101. We'll take it to save our progress. And we're not going to do the polar burn just yet because it'll require more delta V, where we're pretty much right on top of Kerbin. What we're going to do instead is extend our orbit out beyond the Mun and between the Mun and Minmus. And if you highlight Minmus, it'll show its altitude at 46.4 million. We're going to cut that in half, which would be about 23.2 million. So we're going to let that apoapsis burn out until it's about 23.2 million. And then once it hits that, we're going to warp out to it and begin our circularization. And then we'll go polar from there. So once it hits that 23.2 million, let's go ahead and cut our engine off again and warp out there. And this is a very powerful relay. It's not the best relay dish that we could use, but we have 5 of these, as you can see here. There's 4 on the sides, 1 on top. This thing is not going to lose signal. It's a very nice relay to have for now until we can make the better ones. So let's go ahead and finish warping over to the apoapsis. Make sure it's highlighted, and then let's get this periapsis highlighted. Oh wow, we actually have a Mun encounter. Huh. Well, let's make sure to get that Kerbin apoapsis highlighted. That's what we want. Okay, now let's begin our burn. Let's actually try to move a little closer to that apoapsis. There we go. Let's slowly begin our burn until we can get that circularization between the Mun and Minmus. Okay, time to stage. We are now on the cheetah stage, right where we want to be. Let's go full throttle. It's crazy to see that 2,000 some meters per second drop all the way down to the hundreds, like very low, all the way out here. And it's not even going to take that much to make orbit where we are right here either. And once that wraps around, we'll cut it off. It's a nice 23.4 by 23.3. It is time to go polar. So we are going to preferably use normal as our mark to burn polar, because there's a dot in the center of it and it's easier to keep track of. I mean, even after we're done with this burn, we're still going to have to correct our orbit a little bit, because we're not able to lock onto the burn perfectly. Lock onto normal perfectly, or this probe core isn't one of the more advanced ones. But once we get ourselves centered on that normal marker here momentarily, let's see, lock it there, just let it adjust itself. And that should be good enough. Let's begin our burn. Make sure to keep it on top of that. With the engine activated, it'll add gimbaling, so it'll be easier to move. It might take a little bit to move it without the engine on, but we didn't add a reaction wheel, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and throttle up a little bit more. Just make sure to keep it on top of that as good as possible. Once it hits the 270 marker on your nav bulb, we will cut the engine off. I want to make sure that dot is right on top of that, if possible. And we definitely have plenty of delta V. We're not going to need all this delta V for this, so one of these stages up top wasn't even entirely necessary, in all honesty, but it never hurts to over-engineer, you never know. And let's cut that off, and we'll burn it to, okay, there, now it's nice and right on top of that. We should be fully polar. Let's check our apoapsis, 23.3, periapsis, 22.6, so let's lock prograde and move ourselves closer to the apoapsis so we can correct our orbit here just a little bit. I'm a stickler. You don't necessarily have to do this. It's fairly close and looking pretty good, but like I said, I'm a stickler. I like to make sure that it's as close as possible. All about that perfection. Let's rotate our vessel a little bit. Once it locks onto that prograde, we will begin to time warp ahead to the apoapsis to be as close to being on top of it as possible, which should be about there. Let's warp. Highlight our periapsis and apoapsis again. Once it gets there, we will begin to correct our circularization, or our orbit, and we'll be done with this. Okay, now let's go ahead and let it lock itself back on the prograde. Looks like it's pretty much there, so let's increase this until that begins to wrap around. Alright, good. Now we're back to a nice, clean looking orbit. Okay, so there's our new relay in a polar orbit around Kerbin. Now this other one that we have around the Mun isn't entirely necessary to have still, but I'm not going to get rid of it just yet. So let's go ahead and save our progress and then head back to the Space Center. And it'll be time to refit the CRS-2 relay that we just made, so we can make sure that it has a probe that we can land on Duna and get that contract out of the way and see where it takes us from there. Head to our VAB. And once it loads up in our VAB, we still have this. That's good. We're just going to grab it from the fairing down, get rid of that, and now we know that we can take, let's see, it's at 11.7 tons right now. If we grab this stage, that knocks it down to 4. So we know that we can build at least 7 tons worth for this probe that we're planning to land on Duna. So let's grab the Probodyne Hex. Well, before we do that, looks like we're going to have to go to our structural parts and grab, say, an FL-A5 adapter, and we will place it here. Those don't auto strut, so we're good. And then let's place the hex there and auto strut at the heaviest part, and then we'll grab another one of those FL-A5 adapters and put it here. Once again, it does not auto strut. So let's go to our strut connector, place it about here, and then radial 8, and drag it up to about there where you see it kind of adjust itself left and right. That means you're as close to the center as possible, and we'll strut it there. That should be enough structural integrity for this to not snap in half on launch. Once we have that, let's go ahead and grab enough fuel for this to be able to retro burn into Duna's atmosphere and land. We'll do the FL200. We'll place it here. But this is a separate probe, so we are going to have to start building onto it everything that we're going to need for the probe itself. Let's grab some lights. We're going to need some lights. We will put those, say, about here, and we'll radial 3 those lights. We'll turn them on for now just to get a look at it, but we'll move those in to about here. Looks like it'll be touching the strut, so let's move it down just a little bit. Looking good. Alright, let's turn those lights back off. Alright, now let's go to science and grab all the science that we're going to be doing on Duna. We'll begin by placing a thermometer. Okay. Place the thermometer here, set it to radial 1. Let's grab a barometer, go to the opposite side. Oh, we're placing this in 3. Okay, so let's place this barometer right over top of this light. Rotate and grab this and place it over top of this light. And then we're going to grab the seismic accelerometer and place it above the last light. And then we'll grab some mystery goo, and we can just place those sideways here with radial 2. Actually, that's going to touch the light, isn't it? Yep. Okay, so let's place them back up and down, and radial 2 them on the sides instead, and we'll set those to grandparent port. And we will move those into the fuel tank just a hair, like that. Alright, and now that only added, let's see, go back to radial 1. Well, we still need to add some power too, don't we? And some communications. We can put these about, let's see, move this over 1, 2, 3 spaces. That's not good. Where do we want to put these? We can put them here and set it to radial 2. Let's try that again. Okay, radial 2, copy it, move it over here. That should be okay. And we'll also grab some of these Communitron DTS M1s, and we'll place those. Let's see. Put one. No, honestly, I don't know where to put these because we don't have a whole lot of room left. Let's place them here for now. Let's grab the mystery goo again. And we'll just put the mystery goo here now and move them in again. Except now into the probe. There we go. Now it's looking okay. So then we can grab these, go back to our place tool, grab those, try to place them centered on the fuel tank, radial 2. We'll auto strut those to grandparent part, and when we open these antennas, once we land, it'll look like that. Okay, so that's all the communication needs that we need. Now let's grab the Z400 rechargeable pack, and we'll place these here and set them to radial 2. Then we will move those into the fuel tank. And then we need not only these photovoltaic panels here, which we will set to radial 3, and then move over 2 spaces here, as well as 2 spaces here, but then we're also going to need these 1x6s just in case. We'll set those there. So if for some reason we were to lose these, we still have the onboard ones, and that should be plenty for our power needs once we land on Duna, plenty for our communication needs once we land. If we happen to lose these, we will still have these, and vice versa. And the relay that we're sending this with is definitely powerful enough to be able to hold a connection. So that should be everything that we need for our probe, except one final important detail. Let's extend the antenna, make sure that's not going to get in the way. Still looks good. Okay, we'll keep it that way. Let's close the antennas. We need some parachutes. Let's take these drogue chutes, and we will set it to radial 8 at about here. Move it over 1 space, and then auto strut those to grandparent part. And then we will grab these larger ones, and we will set them to radial 3, just below our lights there. If I'm not mistaken, we should be able to take the move tool and bring those in 1 space. Looking good. That should be everything that we need for that probe. Let's make sure our staging is correct. We'll put those up here, and we'll grab the larger chutes, move them away from the drogue chutes, and place those over top of the drogue chutes. Looking good. Now, if we detach the probe itself from the vessel, we see that we are at 4.7 tons for that stage, and that adds about 3.9 tons, so that's good. 3.9 tons, we can still definitely move that with a Terrier engine. With a Terrier engine. We just need to make sure to set that to root as well. Alright, looking good. Now it's time to grab our TD12 decoupler, set it to grandparent part, and this time we are going to take an advanced inline stabilizer and put it about here. Set it to heaviest part, and then we will grab, like last time, the fuel adapter to move it up to a larger tank size. Except this time we're not going to use that one. We're going to grab the A215. Okay, wrong one. The A15 1L should be the one we're after, maybe? Let's find out. Okay, I think we're missing a fuel adapter, but we'll work with what we have. It looks like we are. Just want to be absolutely certain. Okay, yeah, we're missing a fuel adapter, I think. But we'll take this A15-1L, auto strut it to grandparent part, as well as the A215, set it to grandparent part. We need to keep an eye on our mass. We're at 19.13. Let's go on ahead and grab one of the smallest Rocco Maxes that we can grab a hold of, which is the X208. That'll add 4 tons. Okay, so that's pretty small. But we'll go one step up and we'll take this, because what we're aiming to do is make this a Wolfhound stage instead, which is right here. It can push 37.5 tons in a vacuum. Right now it's at 30 tons. Let's set it to root part. It's got a decent amount of delta V, but we kind of want more. We also need to check our staging for that second Terrier engine that's on the probe stage, and we also need to add some landing gear to it as well. Alright, let's put this here, and let's go ahead and detach this so we can check our landing gear out. Let's use the LT ones, and we'll place those. Alright, go to the center of your stage and then move it over 1, 2, 3, and we'll place it radial 4, as long as it's not, okay, it's touching that, might be an issue, so we'll just instead put it about here, and we'll radial 3, that way it's in line with the solar panels, should be fine. There we go. Alright, that's looking good. Let's deploy those shield enabled and retract them, and then we'll place this stage back on, swapping back to radial 1, looking good. Still at 30.7 tons, that's very good. Make sure that's set to root, very good. And we'll take this fuel tank off, go back to our fuel tank, and grab the smaller one, place it here, set it to grandparent part. We're just trying to maximize our fuel here, so 35.28 tons, that's perfect. That's as much as we're going to put on that Wolfhound, pretty much ever, anytime that we ever use it. Now we need to make sure that this is going to be stable, so let's go to our structural parts and go to the strut, find our center point down where that connects to the larger fuel tanks, and we'll go to radial 8, and we'll try to place this as high as we can get it, which will be right beneath that dish. We'll place it there. Some of those will not go all the way up like that one that's touching the landing leg, but that's fine. That should be enough structural integrity for that. So let's go back to radial 1, and we'll put our TD25 decoupler underneath that Wolfhound. Okay, and once we do that, we will set that to grandparent part. And it's time to stage a fairing. Let's grab our 2.5 meter fairing, and it looks like if we extend it out to about here, we should be extended out beyond the reach of the relay dish, but we'll find out here in just a moment. Nope, it needs to go a little further out, so let's hit square. Let's see, move it out to about here maybe, and then let's go back up and see if that's going to miss the relay dish or not. Looks like the relay dish is barely going to be missed, so that should be okay. Like last time, we'll put it to where it's flush with the top of this relay dish, and then we'll go up as high and centered as possible to close it. Let's clamshell deploy at about 500 or so ejection force with 2 sides. It's normally better to do more than 2 sides just in case, but I just like to use 2 sides. And we'll auto strut it to grandparent part. Now it's time to build our launch vessel, because this should be enough to get us to Duna and maybe put us in orbit. But just in case it's not, we want to build a transfer stage to Duna and use the Wolfhound to do the orbital maneuvering and so on. Let's go on ahead and, alright, we're at 39 tons. We can add maybe one of these and put ourselves at 57 tons. Let's go ahead and make sure that we place a reaction wheel above that. We're only using one for this stage, set at the heaviest. That puts us at 57.25 tons. Let's go ahead and grab the smallest Rocco Max tank that we can find, place it there. That puts us at 61.7 tons. That may be too much for a skipper, but let's find out. Once we place the skipper, that puts us at 64.75 tons. That's too much. Let's get rid of that small one. Let's put the skipper back on now. Okay, 60.25 tons. We're looking good. Let's set that to root. Make sure that's set to grandparent. Let's check our staging. Want that decoupler to go off with the Wolfhound. We want that to go off before we get to that point, or it's going to look real bad and messy. Alright, that should be good. Alright, let's grab our TD25 decoupler and place it under that skipper stage. And we'll set it to grandparent part. Now, let's grab some more of these large reaction wheels. We're going to place 2 of them, and we're going to put the top one on root, since we're using 2, bottom one heaviest. Save our progress, but we're going to rename this craft the CRS-2A, since it's a refit or a variant on the craft itself. And let's grab the largest Rocco Max tank that we can find, wherever it went. There it is. Alright, let's grab that and place it under those. Puts us at 96.8 tons. Looking good. Let's set that to grandparent part. Let's grab the Rocco Max X216, place that to, or auto strut that to grandparent part, and then we will place a smaller one under that, like so. I set it to grandparent part. I just do that for aesthetics. You don't necessarily have to use the same ones as long as the mass comes out to about the same, because we're at 110.3 tons. This can push 137.9 on the launch stage, but you don't want it to be 137. Alright, let's set that to root part, and it's right above the ground, right where we want it, so we won't have to move this vessel around anymore. Let's check our staging, make sure that the coupler goes off with the skipper, and you may think that might be enough, but it's not going to be. We are going to go to our decouplers and grab one of these TT-70 radial decouplers. We'll place it as close to the center of this stage as possible. Should be about right here. And we will set it to radial 4. We're not going to bother asparagus staging this. Save ourselves some time and complications. It's not going to be that big of an issue. In fact, let's not do that. Let's grab that. We're just going to make this one nice long solid vessel. Let's go to radial 1 and grab our probe core and move it up a decent bit. Try to anyways. There we go. Let's go back down here, and now it's time to break out some of these new fuel tanks and engines. Let's go to our decoupler, grab our TD25 for the last time, and put it here. Auto strut that to grandparent part, and we are going to need to grab about root part, and then we'll set the bottom 2 to heaviest. Now it's time to break out some of those new parts and use them finally. Let's go to our fuel tanks and grab the new fuel tank adapter, the ADTP-2-3 here. And instead of going with the S3 series tanks that we unlocked, we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to go ahead and skip past that and go to the S3. Set it to grandparent part. And let's break out the Carbodyne S4 512 fuel tank. It's one of the largest fuel tanks in the game, if not the largest, if I'm not mistaken. And we'll set it to grandparent part. We are going to have to grab this and move it up much higher. Let's move down a little bit, then grab the probe core, and then move back up. Let's see what that looks like. This could be very dangerous. It could very well fail, but we'll find out. Let's place this here. Set the auto strap to grandparent part, and it's still not high enough. So let's go back up here. Find our probe core. Try to lower ourselves down as much as possible to where that probe core is right under the name of the vessel. Then we'll grab it and then raise ourselves up a little bit and come back down here. And before we go any further, we need to do some struts so we can have some more structural integrity. Let's grab our strut connector and place it here. Radial 8, go as high as possible. And once we have those popping back up, let's place those there. Let's go back down, and we're going to keep it set to radial 8. Oh, that wasn't as low as possible now, was it? Let's set these here and just connect them wherever for now. And then go back to these, set them there as low as possible, and go up as high as possible until we see them pop back up on our vessel. Once we do, I guess it'll be right above this engine. Okay, make sure it's close to the center of that stage, and then we will place them. A little touchy. There we go. Alright, circle around, make sure all those are connected. Very good. Let's go down here. Let's grab this. Make sure it's still set to radial 8, and then raise it back up. And we will try to place it about there next to the other strut that we placed. And we're going to zoom out a little bit and make sure that each of those are connecting. If they are not, let's move over to one that's not connecting to anything, grab it, and re-strut it again from there. Take it up as high as we can get it. So about here. Okay, now all of those should be connecting to something. Very good. Alright, and let's grab our struts one last time. Radial 8, place them there. Try to find a spot between the other ones. Place it. Make sure every one of those are connecting. Looking good. Okay. That should be okay. Should be enough structural integrity. Let's make sure that's set to grandparent. Okay. Now we need to make sure that our staging is good. Let's save our progress. Now it's time to break out these new engines, because this thing weighs 509.9 tons. May as well say 510 tons. Let's break out the mastodons. Now if we just grab those and place them like this, it's not going to look good. Same thing with the mainsail, which you would preferably use, and in fact we're going to take that mainsail and stick it in the center. However, we can't place those or these mastodons like this on the outer spots there, so let's push up on the D-pad and reduce its size once, and then we'll grab that, place it on one of those corners, and radial 4. Looking good. Now let's set those to root part, and let's also grab the mainsail and make sure that it's set to root part. Let's put those engines together, but let's place this mainsail to go off first, and then those other 4 can go off. And then we will grab some launch stabilizers, and we will take those launch stabilizers and place them where we usually do, where our center of mass is. We'll set it to radial 4 and plop. There we go. Now we have those. Let's make sure to put our mainsail there below that, and then we'll put these 4 above it. Now let's save our progress, and we just need to make sure our aerodynamic overlay is set in between the center of mass and the center of thrust. Let's go down here. We might need some of these larger fins that we have unlocked. The AVR8 winglets. Let's grab those. Find our center point between those launch stabilizers and place it between the center of mass and the center of thrust like so. Set those to grandparent part. Now we have a very solid launch vehicle for this relay and probe that we're sending to Duna. So let's save it. And now before launching, let's return to our space center so we can make sure that we are positioned at the proper orbital placement of Kerbin to make our transfer to Duna. Make sure that we have the most optimized transfer window, and we will do that. But first, let's go ahead and quick save. Make sure we don't lose any progress for any reason whatsoever. Go to our tracking station, and then as soon as the tracking station's open, I'm going to make sure to get rid of any debris that we might have, like this. Everything else is looking good. Alright, let's click the left stick in so you can use your mouse and zoom all the way out until you see Duna. Now we need to make sure that Duna is basically on the opposite side of Kerbin from where it is right now, which would be over here, preferably. That way there's like a straight line between Kerbin and Duna, like we did when we did our Duna flyby. Let's go to time warp mode. Let's max it out. It's going to take it a second for Kerbin to wrap all the way back around. So while we're waiting on that, let's see what else we can discuss. See, once we get this vessel in orbit and transferring to Duna, then we need to make our Duna orbit, and hopefully by then we'll still have that stage beneath the probe to be able to make that orbit around Duna. Then we can release that stage, release the probe, and release the relay all at once. And then we can use that Terra engine to bring the probe down into Duna's atmosphere where we want it to land. And the thing about Duna, it has a very thin atmosphere, and since this is our first time landing on Duna, I have to point this out, where it has a very thin atmosphere, those parachutes aren't going to be as effective as they would be on Kerbin, so you will need a lot more. And just in case, even if you have quite a bit of parachutes, preferably the drogue chutes too, to be honest, but even if you have a lot of those, you'll want to make sure to maybe include some engines too, because no matter how many parachutes you put on it, unless you put an ungodly amount of parachutes on it, it's not going to be enough to slow down on Duna. So you'll need the engines to further assist your slowing of the descent to the Dunan surface. But you'll see that here soon. And you'll definitely want to grab those landing legs because it's got a little bit more mass than the Moon or Minmus that we're used to. It's got a little bit more, but still like 10% of the mass that Kerbin has, so the gravity's still not as strong as other atmospheric planets like Lathe or Kerbin or Eve especially, but still not a whole lot, but more than the Mun or the Minmus, which has no atmosphere at all and virtually no gravity at all, really. But we are quickly approaching the launch window. Well, oh crap. Okay, let's cut that time warp. Oh, that's getting messy. Let's recenter ourselves back at Kerbin. Looks like we missed our launch window by a hair, but it's still okay. Looks like it's still in a good placement. We're just ahead of the launch window, but it'll be okay. Let's leave the tracking station. Alright, let's go to our launch pad, go to our CRS-2A, and launch it. And let's head to Duna. Let's put a relay and a probe around Duna and on Duna. And then we'll get that station out to Duna and prepare to land on Duna with some Kerbins and do some breaking ground science and bring that vessel home. Okay, now let's go ahead and see, it's looking stable. We're zeroed out nice and well. Let's lock our SAS, throttle up, and launch. Now, I'm very worried about the structural integrity of this vessel, even though we have a lot of struts going on here, and we have some struts even on the interior of that fairing. That's still quite the bottleneck section we have there in the center of this vessel. So once we start turning the vessel, let's make sure not to do it too quickly, and if it starts to wobble, turn the SAS off. In fact, it may be better just to have the SAS off to begin with, but we'll go ahead and begin. We'll try to keep our camera looking over top of it. That way we can watch for too much movement and vibration in the vessel to make sure it doesn't rip itself apart. But for now, let's do our standard launch. Move ourselves over to the 80 mark. This is a very stable vessel, to be honest. It's looking very good with plenty of thrust of weight. But don't let that fool you. I know it's hard to see where it's a nighttime launch. I apologize for that. YouTube doesn't really make it a whole lot better where all uploads are a little darker. But we'll get through. It's just a standard launch. Moving over to the 90 mark as we push up to 500 meters per second. We're just barely ahead of our prograde, pushing it over. Very impressive vehicle that we built here. Way more stable than I thought it was going to be. Once we hit there, we'll lock on. Now, usually when I go to the map view and I'm at this point in the launch, this is where it becomes critical. As the G-forces continue to increase while in atmosphere, it can rip this vessel in half, so be very, very careful. But once we hit about 70,000, and it switches over to orbit mode, we're going to go full sideways and hopefully not rip this thing in half. Alright, let's prepare to do that. Alright, we are reaching max Q. Let's try to do this without ripping this vessel in half. Alright, we are now in orbit mode automatically. It's very good when it does that. Moving on over to that horizon mark. Once we hit it, let's lock our SAS. Barely shifted our rotation at all. Very nice. Vehicle still holding itself together. We should be getting close to that 100,000 mark on the apoapsis now. Let's cut it off. We are waiting until we hit 70,000 meters so we can time warp over. And since we're ahead of our launch window, we had to make every second count, to be honest. Let's go ahead and find Duna, set it as our target. That way, Duna is always popping up on our map, no matter how zoomed in we are. Ooh, we are right where we need to be. Let's go ahead and activate that engine and try to push this. Okay, time to stage. Alright, let's cut the engine off and stage and turn it back on just a hair. Alright, and now we need to activate the engine so we have more gimbaling, so we can move this ahead of the target. Crap, okay, we're gonna have to make one orbital pass before we do this, so let's go back to the horizon mark, lock ourselves there once we hit that 90-degree inclination. And let's time warp over to that apoapsis, which is way higher than I would prefer it to be, but it's not very high, to be honest. I mean, it's okay still. Once we get there, let's throttle up just a little bit so it has an easier time moving back over to the prograde mark. And as soon as it hits that prograde mark, throttle up, but very slowly throttle up, just in case. Don't want to rip the vessel in half. And let's finish our orbital circularization burn. And then we'll make a pass around Kerbin to where our prograde is lined up with that pink target reticle. And then we'll begin our Duna transfer burn. Not really losing any fuel or anything, so it's not a big deal. Let's also let's keep an eye on that so we can make sure that we circularize correctly here. Then we will get rid of the fairing a little early. As soon as that's about there, we'll cut off. It's not going to be an even orbit, but that's okay. We'll correct it once we get to the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and time warp until we can get some sunlight here. There we go. Now we can see what we're doing. Alright, let's deploy our fairing. Looking good. Let's turn our time warp mode off. Let's go down, or go up to our top two photovoltaic panels here and extend those. That way we don't lose power. and then we will finish warping around to our apoapsis. Once we hit it, we're going to have to do a couple things very quickly. Before we do though, let's go retrograde. That way once we warp around to the other side of the orbit, we'll be pointing prograde already, and we won't have to wait for it to realign itself. I'm just waiting on that to point itself to retro. Now that it's near retro, we will go on ahead and warp near the apoapsis, not all the way over to it. That way we have time to adjust our rocket's orientation. But we also want to make sure that we have the apoapsis and periapsis highlighted. Let's keep an eye on our resources, make sure that we're keeping power. Very good. Alright, now we're close. See, it's a little closer to being prograde now, so it's less of a hassle. There's a couple things we're going to have to do here. We're going to have to get that periapsis to where it matches the apoapsis real quick. And as you can see, that target reticle in the nav ball is a lot closer now. So we're approaching the point to where we need to start our transfer burn. Let's go ahead and start raising this up to where the apoapsis is barely moving ahead. And then we will cut the thrust once it wraps around. Now that should be a more desirable orbit. Let's highlight Duna and go ahead and time warp until we're at the end of our orbit where Duna is ahead of us, and by then we should start to see the prograde and the target reticle touch. And once they start touching, we're going to cut our warp like so. Wait for it to point itself back prograde, and once it does, we will begin our transfer burn. Let's take a look at this vessel. It's in the dark. Can't see a thing. Let's activate our lights. Yay, lights. Okay, let's turn them back off so we're not losing power. And we are locked on prograde. Let's start our burn. Let's check this stage out. We have 700 meters of delta V remaining on it, so we're probably going to have to stage before we leave the Kerbin system and get to that Wolfhound stage. That's okay. Once it reaches about near the Mun, I'd say, if not sooner. Wow, okay, it's losing delta V pretty quickly. Alright, and let's prepare to stage. 3, 2, 1. Oh, it's going to be the skipper stage. Good. Alright, let's cut the engine stage. Go ahead and throttle up nice and smooth. Alright, now we need to zoom out very quickly as it's going to extend faster and faster. We are now on our way out towards Duna. Once that apoapsis hits Duna's line, we're going to want to cut the engine and slowly bring it in until we get that encounter, so we can set the throttle on that engine down nice and low and get a nice close encounter with this. So this is why we didn't want to miss that transfer window. It doesn't look as good as it did last time, does it? Alright, let's bring that down to about there. And let's go to our skipper and cut the thrust limiter down to about 10%, preferably. And then highlight our approach marker and bring it in until we get that encounter. Very, very low throttle. As soon as we get that encounter under 100,000 kilometers, we will cut the engine. And I already have Duna set as our focus, but I'll do it again. Let's move in. Now we can see that's a little higher than it needs to be, but thanks to this probe core not being as advanced as we wanted, we can't really lock on to normal and anti-normal. We have to do it manually. So let's move over here to the anti-normal and see if this does what we need first. Let's check our vessel too. We're in the dark, so we are at risk of losing power. We can use the skipper engine to keep the power going when needed, but I digress. Let's move over to the anti-normal mark. Once we are there, let's thrust it just a hair and see what kind of effect we have on this periapsis. See if it brings it down. Okay, it is moving it up, so we need to be pointing on the opposite side, locked onto the normal marker. So let's move ourselves over. Once it's about halfway, I'm going to stop moving it with the stick, let it do its thing, because by the time it gets close, it'll slow itself down automatically. And we can fine tune it to where we're right on top of that little dot in the middle there. And we will lock our SAS on. Continue to do that until it's right where we want it to be. Let's begin our burn. And if we zoom in a little bit, we can see the orbital line of Ike, make it nice and flush with both sides. And that's where we're going to want this line to be moved down to. So let's go full throttle. It's only on 10%, so it's not too much. Once that periapsis and orbital line is down as close to flush as possible there, we will cut the engine like so. And then we will go back to prograde, and honestly, we really need to reduce that thrust limiter down even more, like say 1.15. Go back to our map view, and I'll show you why. Unless you saw the last video, then you already know. But see our periapsis, we're locked on prograde, let's move it in. Barely even thrusting at 1.15. Barely even thrusting at that, and it's still moving it in very quickly. And that's why you want to limit the thrust power of the engine that we're using. Let's move it in nice and close in between Duna and Ike. Say about there, that should be good. So Ike is at 2.8 million. So about 1.4 would be the halfway mark. That's pretty close. Let's save there. Let's make sure we're also coming in on the 90 side and not the 180 side. See, our escape is over there. We're coming in from there, so we are going to be pointing towards the 90-degree side. That's good. Just want to do another quick save just in case. And now we will go to our time warp mode and push it ahead once. Okay, 1.4. It actually pushed us out to where we want to be, but that's good. We'll take it, and we will set ourselves to warp into the Duna system. Okay, we can't time warp that far. It looks like we might have another encounter over here, maybe? No? Okay, nothing's getting in the way, that's good. Let's find out where our Kerbin escape is on this line and warp out a little beyond that. We'll let it do that first. Make sure it did not affect our periapsis over here. Should still be at 1.4, looking good. Okay, once we're there, we will refocus on Duna. Highlight our periapsis again. And make sure that it's not going to affect it too much by time warping ahead just once. Barely affected it at all. Very good. Okay. And then, like I said before, let's move ourselves into the Duna system. Let's watch ourselves along the way. Now, it is at this point, once we arrive, I'm going to make the orbit and then detach all this, and I'm going to stop the episode there where we're already 9 minutes over the hour mark. I'm going to take a quick break, and then after that I'll be back to finish this in a second episode for today. So we're losing electrical charge and gaining it back and forth, back and forth. Doesn't make sense though, because it doesn't look like it's losing any sun exposure at all. But not sure what's going on with that, but that's okay. What we're really concerned about is making sure that it keeps the connectivity with the relays that we have around Kerbin and the Mun. It's already degraded down to that yellow color. Let's zoom in, take a closer look at those lines. Yeah, our service quality is down to the yellow. Now it's down to the orange. Uh-oh. Hope we don't lose signal here. I think we'll be okay though, but we'll know by the time we arrive. We still have 90 days to go, and Kerbin is almost at the opposite side of the solar orbit. Hope the sun doesn't get in the way, or Kerbal. If it does, that's going to present a problem. Should be strong enough to push through it. Oh, we're down to 1 bar. We still have connectivity. Fantastic. Alright. Now, this is because we're playing on normal. If it was on moderate or hard, we would not have service at all. And if it was on easy, we'd probably have full bars. Alright, so now we made it safely. While we're here already, transmit or recover scientific data from the space around Duna. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go up here to our thermometer. It doesn't really matter what we pick, I don't believe, but we can take the mystery goose, see if we can get anything out of it, and we won't, so we're not going to use that. Let's do our thermometer. We're not going to get anything, but if we transfer the data, or transmit it, we will still get credit for it. Voila. And we scored a few bucks off of that, almost 100,000. And still have plenty of electrical charge. Alright, we need to point retrograde. And while it reorients itself retrograde, we need to find out where we're going to go to do our circularization burn. We want to hit that periapse, but we don't want to hit Ike. And you never know. So, once we hit that retro marker and we're locked on, we will time warp ahead just a hair, manually first, and then we're going to time warp just shy of Ike and make sure that we're going to pass by it. These moons, you can't trust them. Okay, so we're going to be safe, so let's go ahead and time warp to where we're about a minute behind that periapsis, I'd say. That looks good. And once we get there, we will begin our retro burn, so we can make orbit around Duna. And we're going to take this relay, and we're going to adjust its orbit towards a polar orbit around Duna. I like to put all my relays in polar orbits. That way you really don't need too many of them, and they have a larger window of connectivity back to Kerbin. Alright, so we want to wait until it's about 15 seconds away from the periapse, I'd say, and then we will begin our burn. We still have 640 meters per second of delta V. That should be plenty to put both of these in orbit. So 20, let's begin our burn. Oh yeah, we should probably highlight that engine and turn the thrust limiter back all the way up. There we go. Little late, but better late than never. Let's let that do its thing. As long as it doesn't burn for more than about 15 seconds after passing the periapse, we should be okay. It should still be preferable. But we still have the Wolfhound engine too, so we're okay. As long as we can make the orbit, we can adjust the orbit. Alright, so it's been about 10 seconds now past the periapse, I'd say. It's going to take a little longer. We're going to have to reduce this down quite a bit. See, even something as large as Ike is only moving at about 309 meters per second out at 2.8 million. We're going to have to reduce this quite a bit. Alright, let's stage. Close our time warp mode and stage. Alright, and that's going to eject itself out of the Dunan system, so we don't have to worry about it. It's floating off into space somewhere. Let's realign ourselves. Make sure those are pointing up and down for maximum sun exposure. Lock ourselves back on the retro. And we are about to make our orbit here shortly. It's starting to wrap around a lot faster. Let's say once it hits about 550 meters per second. Let's see, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright. We need to adjust our angle, but otherwise we are starting to look good. Let's wait until that kinda starts to wrap around. And cut. We are right in between Duna and Ike where we want to be. It's pretty stable, good looking orbit, I'd say, but it is a little lopsided. We want to warp to where we are going to be in between the apoapsis and periapsis, which we kind of already are, to be honest, but let's go ahead and do that. And hope we don't lose connectivity at any point. We are going to, once we warp around to the backside, I'd say. We want to definitely make sure to do this before Kerbin gets behind Kerbol, the sun. And we should be losing connectivity for a moment and then regaining it. And once we reach where we are warping to, we are going to want to, let's see, looks like we're going to want to lower our normalization, so let's go to anti-normal, I believe. No, looks like we might want to raise it. Let's find out though. Let's lock on to anti-normal first. Let's see what happens when we do that burn. If I'm not mistaken, we actually do want to raise it. So we might have to burn normal, but we'll find out. Looks like it's honestly already pointing at 180, but so yeah, that's lowering it. Making it even more lopsided, which is not okay. Well, you know, we'll go with that because we'll take our probe and land it at the pole, even though that's not where we're going to be landing the vessel. Like, I prefer to land the probe ahead of the vessel so we know where we want to land the vessel, but that's okay. Let's throttle up and begin our polar burn. Let's try not to waste all of our wolfhound stage, but we still have plenty, so it's not too much of a concern. Once this is pointing, I want to say at 270. Yeah, 270. Once this is at 270, we're going to cut the engine. And that takes care of the polar orbit for the relay, so we don't have to worry about that. We can use whatever remaining fuel to play around with our orbit to make it as easy on the probe as possible. That way it's not too dangerous for the probe to land. Because we could very well lose connectivity while we're landing, and as much as we don't want that, it can happen. So we are almost at 270, let's cut. Check out our orbit, nice and polar. Okay, so we are going to not lose connectivity at all, I don't think. Very good. Let's check our periapsis and apoapsis out real fast. Okay, so we want to warp to our apoapsis now. And once we get there, ooh, okay, bad side. Let's warp to this side of the apoapsis and set it to prograde. Then we will try to balance out our abscesses here. Let that go to prograde, and once it locks back on to prograde, we'll warp right on top of that apoapsis. And once it's there, let's do our warp. And then we'll let it reorient itself back to locking on to prograde. Once it does, we'll start to adjust that periapsis until it wraps around. As soon as it starts to wrap around, about halfway we'll cut. There we go. That should be close to 1.5 by 1.5. Very nice. Alright, let's save. Keep our progress there. Make sure there's nothing else we can do in the space around Duna. Okay, now let's prepare to land. We are going to first go ahead and manually decouple the relay. However, first let's extend all 4 of these antennas. Once we get all those highlighted, we will extend them. There we go. Alright, let's extend those 4 tiny ones. And now let's get these other ones on the side. 2 of these Communitron DTSM1s. Once we get those highlighted, we will extend those. And then we also want to make sure that we extend these 3 solar panels. But we'll do that after we eject this stage. We're going to manually decouple this relay from the rest of it. That way we don't have to lose this wolfhound stage connected to the probe core. Let's see, that is there. So we will take it and move it down to here. let's say, just in case it decides not to read our staging properly, make sure our throttle's all the way down. Turn off our SAS and turn it back on, that way it's not locked onto any mark, so it doesn't flip the vessels around randomly or anything like that. And let's stage. Alright, that still has connectivity, and this should be connected to the relay that we now have disconnected, which actually, yeah, it's connected to the relay, I believe. So if we turn this to a direct link, wow, is it actually? No way. Okay, let's check this out. Comnet and signal. Wow, it's connected all the way back to Kerbin. Interesting. Anyways, let's leave our relay where it is for now, and use the rest of this wolfhound to reduce our orbit that we have. Let's deselect the information so we can rotate here. Now let's reduce the periapsis and apoapsis down to about 100,000 by 100,000. Should have enough fuel to do that. We just lost a lot of mass too, so let's see how much mass this thing has now. It's 21.35. That's definitely small enough for this wolfhound to push 37 tons. So let's go ahead and reduce that periapsis down to 100,000. Once it hits about just a little above 100,000, we will cut the engine, and we will warp to the periapsis. Picked the wrong side again. Okay, let's go to that side of the periapsis. There we go. Now we can see the signal with that relay. As long as we have signal, we are good. That's all we're concerned about. Let's warp a little closer once it's done locking onto the retrograde mark. Alright, we are locked. Let's warp ahead. And as soon as it locks back onto the retro, once we finish this warp, we will reduce the apoapsis down to 100,000. Get ourselves a nice stable 100 by 100 orbit here. We are cleaner speed to try to move in on this landing of the probe. Let's reduce it just a little bit. There we go. Alright, let's save our progress. Now, before I do this landing, this is where I'm going to cut this episode for now. I'm going to take like a quick 10-15 minute break, grab a snack, grab a drink, then I will be right back and we will land this probe, and then we will send our station core out around Duna and have an unmanned station waiting for our landing vessel to dock up to, refuel, land, come back up, redock again, refuel one more time, and then come back home. But for now, thank you for watching. I will see you all here in about 15 more minutes for episode 11, where we will be landing this probe. But before we do, let's make sure to extend our solar panels. And then extend these other... Okay, yeah, those are already extended. Good. Okay, now we are ready. Alright, let's save. And once again, thank you for watching. I will see you all again here shortly. Goodbye.